Well, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're all staying safe and healthy as the world is going through another surge of coronavirus. But we have good news, right? We have hopes of hopefully that will bring us another hope of going back to normal once again. So I would like to thank our NRC staff, Richard Haddock and Amira Bailey, for organizing this meaningful event today. I'm very delighted to give my opening remarks. The Secret Center for Asian Studies and the Institute for Korean Studies were successful in winning the Title VI grant supported by the U.S. Department of Education in 2017. And with this grant, we established East Asia National Resource Center and have been active in terms of outreach in the area. And this grant allows us to enhance resources for educators, students, and future leaders in the field of East Asia. If you're interested in area studies, we believe that language is essential to developing your expertise in the region. So with our FLAS fellowship, we offer language fellowships every year. And Dane, who will be speaking shortly, was one of the recipients of this fellowship. And I would like to share a quote from a former U.S. Secretary of State and GW alumnus, Colin Powell. He stated, and I quote him, "It is important for American students to learn other languages, experience foreign cultures, and develop a broad understanding of global issues. International education prepares our citizens to live, work, and compete in the global economy and promotes tolerance and the reduction of conflict." End quote. So, as we can see, it is the importance of language and international education is something that we emphasize very much here at GW, and especially also since our NRC was established, we even emphasize more and also promote language and area studies in East Asia even more. So, all right, so before the pandemic, over 1,000 GW students participated in study abroad each year, and over 160 exchange students came to GW annually from overseas institutions. Due to the pandemic, unfortunately, like many other programs, our study abroad programs have been forced to temporarily put on hold. And as we all know, many businesses have been impacted by the COVID-19. And the higher education is no exception. For example, Trump administration executed visa restrictions for international students, and this impacted new incoming students as well as current students. So for current students, they were afraid that they won't be able to return to US once they leave the country. And we can, certainly see this with our PhD students in the history department. And I am, assuming this is not only within the history department, but also in other departments as well. So for example, one of our PhD students who is Chinese has been impacted by COVID since he cannot go to China to conduct archival research. So he's afraid he might not be able to return. And another PhD student who is a student of the co-director of East Asia National Resource Center, Ben Hopkins, this student is currently stuck in Pakistan and not being able to return. So this is a real issue that we are facing right now. In addition, social pressures related to the pandemic, such as racial discrimination against Asian and Asian American communities, have further exacerbated these complex issues. So we have assembled this panel today to discuss openly how the pandemic has affected educators and students alike, and what are the future prospects of international education in the COVID-19 era. It is very important that we hear from students on this matter, and I'm glad that Dane Frean was able to join us today. And before I turn it over to Dane, Fee and I forgot to introduce myself first. I often do that. Just, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jisoo Kim, and I co-direct East Asia National Resource Center and also direct Institute for Korean Studies. And with that brief introduction, I'll turn it over to Dane. Dane is a second-year MA student in Asian Studies and vice president of the Organization of Asian Studies, and OAS is co-sponsoring the event today. All right, Dane.
Thank you. So the Organization of Asian Studies is a graduate student organization here at the Elliott School, and as Dr. Kim said, I'm the vice president of this organization, and so I can speak for the entire organization when I say that we recognize the importance of international education. Our organization strives to create professional networks of young professionals interested in Asia from all corners of the world, and in our event programming, we aim to share cultural experiences and expand the academic experience of the Elliott School. And our efforts are underpinned by international education. Through our event programming, we connect, educate, learn, and share through these cultural exchanges. And for that reason, our organization was delighted to co-sponsor this event with the NRC, bringing these challenges that international education faces into the spotlight. And so it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this event, Dr. Laura Engel. Dr. Laura Engel is an associate professor of international education and international affairs, director of the International Education Program, and co-chair of the GW UNESCO Chair in International Education for Development at the George Washington University. Her interests focus on global education policy trends in federal systems, including education policy uses of international large-scale assessments and internationalization of education. She is the author of over 50 articles, book chapters, and policy briefs. Her latest book is The Machinery of School Internationalization in Action. Dr. Engel serves on the board of directors of the NEA Foundation and is joint editor of the International Studies and Sociology of Education. Dr. Engel earned her PhD in Education Policy from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Engel. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for that kind welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And I'd like to first wish you all a happy International Education Week, and to thank our organizers, Jisoo, Richard, Amir, Dwayne, thank you very much. As I've been thinking about and reflecting on what it means to be in a field like international education in a moment like the one we're living through today, it's still very remarkable to me to think about how much has shifted in such a short amount of time. According to Open Doors data from just last year, so the academic year 2019 to 2020, there were over 1 million international students studying in the United States, which is 5.5% of the total higher education student population in the United States. Around 372,000 of these students were from China. Trends in US study abroad showed annual increases over time, where last year around 347,000 US students were engaged in study abroad programs for credit. The conditions and effects of COVID-19 has challenged so much of the field of international education. As many of us in higher education transitioned to working from home, canceled travel, Zoom and WebEx took over our lives, we saw international student recruitment halted. We saw embassies closed. We saw US students return home or get stuck abroad. We saw study abroad programs suspended. We saw people in our field losing their jobs. For the first time in 11 years at GW, I'm now teaching classes where international students are joining us from Ghana, Germany, and China rather than in person. Many in our field are directly impacted and considering the future of international education. And I think as the opening remarks also indicated, international ed has faced other challenges, including proposals to change visa regulations and suspend the optional practical training or OPT program. And sadly, we've seen growing anti-Asian racism in the United States, challenging perceptions of the United States as a safe and welcoming place for international students. So as we consider this post-COVID world, and I hope we enter this post part of it very soon, we're grappling with all of these challenges. We're asking ourselves, we're asking each other, what might be the short and long-term effects of COVID on the prospects of international education? What will possibly change and what needs to change? While some in our field are predicting profound shifts, what's interesting is that the effects, interesting and problematic, the effects are differentially felt across the world and among US institutions. Some of the more elite institutions, for example, are able to ride out the turbulence far easier than others. One recent study showed that international student enrollments at the US News and World Report top 50 institutions had actually grown. Other institutions are seeing major enrollment declines and suffering through the resulting financial shortfalls. What we seem to be seeing plainly from these early trends is that COVID-19 has sped up the fragmentation in the system, with the potential to deepen inequalities both globally and nationally. Now, in addition to academic and even government policy changes, many of which seem frankly catastrophic, it's also important to look at student data. In a WES study, 67% of surveyed students indicated that they were still interested in studying in the United States. 13% were more interested in doing so. These kinds of data seem to indicate that the doom and gloom predictions may not be quite accurate. But similar to what Noah Sobe said at a seminar yesterday about higher education in the post-COVID world, we should also not necessarily return to a nostalgic idea of the past. And I think that holds true for us in international education. We have opportunities here, despite all of these challenges, to reimagine the futures in international ed and to do so collectively. And for that, I'm really looking forward to this exciting panel on prospects for international education in the COVID-19 era. We have an exciting set of speakers who are joining us, and so please allow me to introduce them, and please join me in welcoming each of our panelists. Our first speaker is Scott Osdrus, Program Officer at the AC Study and Research Abroad team at American Councils for International Education, where he oversees intensive language and regional studies programs in Taiwan and Indonesia. Scott's first introduction to international education was as a participant on the Critical Language Scholarship, or CLS program, in Beijing in 2010. And he has worked and taught both in China and Taiwan. So welcome, Scott. We're next joined by Alexis Snyder, a second-year student enrolled in Elliott's Master of Arts in Asian Studies program, focusing on the history of modern Asia and international development. She studied in an intensive Korean program in Seoul in 2017. And Alexis also works at GW as a student success coach within the College of Professional Studies. Welcome, Alexis. Our last panelist is Steen, a freelance journalist based in Washington, D.C., covering foreign affairs, technology, US-China relations, and the Korean Peninsula. Her works have appeared in the New York Times, South China Morning Post, SupChina, and NK News, among others. She's previously worked as a news researcher for the New York Times in Beijing and as a reporter. She holds an MA in International Science and Technology from the George Washington University. Welcome, Luz. So welcome to each of our panelists. I'm very excited to hear from each of you. In our order of events, I will now turn it over to Scott and then to Alexis and Luz to offer their remarks in turn. And then we'll move into some Q&A. So please don't forget to add any of your own questions into the chat as we move through. So at this point, let me hand it over to Scott. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Engel. I'm so happy to be here to share my perspectives working in international education during such a unique and unprecedented time. It's been an incredibly challenging 8 months. It feels like a lot more than 8 months. As it has been for everyone in education and beyond in all fields. But it's also been a learning experience like no other. In our field, we often stress to students that study abroad experiences help build key skills like adaptability, resilience, and strong communication. And this year, that may certainly be the case for study abroad administrators just as much or more as it is for students. We optimistically look ahead to a time soon when all overseas programming can resume. But from this experience, this year, we hope to bring and carry forward some key lessons and perspective that we can apply to all of our future work. Please advance the slide, please. Thank you. A quick introduction to American Councils for International Education. We're just a short walk from the GW campus in Washington, D.C. near Farragut Square. We're an international nonprofit founded in 1974 and focused on exchanges, professional training, and learning of critical and less commonly taught languages. This goes in both directions, U.S. students and participants going abroad for immersive learning experiences in countries around the world, and also in the other direction, bringing people from all around the world to the U.S. for similar experiences. Next slide, please. A few quick key numbers. We work in 80 countries with programming in 40 languages and participants from schools across the United States, high schools, colleges, and universities as well. And next slide, please. From a quick look at the map, our focus and our expertise is expanding exchange, building ties, and bridging gaps in knowledge and understanding with regions less commonly visited and studied by Americans. So you might notice sort of Western Europe is sort of not where we work, or Australia or English-speaking language regions. It's like most of the rest of the world, including Asia, which is a big focus of ours as well. Next slide, please. While the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly affected American Council's work on nearly all of our programs, to narrow the focus today, I'll highlight my experience working specifically on outbound study abroad programs for U.S. students to study language and culture in Asia. American Councils has 4 departments working on programs that fit this description. The first being American Council's Study Abroad, which is the team that I work on. We administer intensive language, regional studies, and internship programs in countries throughout the former Soviet Union, as well as Taiwan and Indonesia, which is my personal focus. While we are a study abroad provider and not specifically a scholarship program, participants have the opportunity to apply for scholarship funding and fellowship funding for our programs through a variety of partners, including from the Taiwan Ministry of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, and the U.S. Department of State. In addition to AC Study Abroad, American Councils also administers the Critical Language Scholarship Program, which I'm an alumni of. And it offers fully funded overseas intensive study in 15 critical languages, including Chinese, Korean, and Japanese for Asian-focused students. For college students each summer, the program is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State. Also sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, the National Security Language Initiative for Youth program offers fully funded summer and academic year overseas immersion programs to high school students studying 7 languages, including Chinese and Korean. Finally, my colleagues on the language flagship team help administer overseas capstone years that combine internships with intensive language study, including in Chinese, for students enrolled in language flagship programs at select colleges and universities across the U.S. And that's a program sponsored by the Department of Defense. Well, I'll try to provide my best to provide an overview that touches on common challenges we faced and the similar ways we thought through them this year. What I'll be sharing over the next few minutes is primarily from my own experiences on the programs I administer personally and may not always apply across the board. Due to the unique variation in our program formats, our funders, our target languages, and host institutions, of course, there has been a significant amount of variation as well. Next slide, please. Just an overview of sort of what this year has looked like for us in our programs. It's hard to think back to January, like before any of this started, but COVID really wasn't on anyone's radar, or it was just starting in China. But all of our normal academic year programs began. Students went overseas normally. But as news of the pandemic spread, by March, all overseas programming had to be suspended and our students came home. But we were able to begin online classes immediately for some of those students. So they effectively had a hybrid program or began overseas, but they completed their programs online. So this photo that you see here is one of our students on our Indonesian overseas program. After returning from Malang, Indonesia in March, she completed 2 more months of online study in Indonesian online, and she completed a research paper. Here she is presenting it to her teachers and her colleagues. Since the spring, all of our summer and our fall programs have been completely online. So in terms of the effect on our programs themselves, like all of our programs have been able to continue, but they've all been switched to an online format. Next slide, please. So some pre-program challenges that we faced, really during this time when it wasn't clear what the next week would bring, not to mention the next month, it was difficult for us. Where immersion, overseas study is such a bedrock of what we do and what we offer students, to decide when to make the call. Do we do an overseas program? Do we hold out hope and wait to see if we can continue as planned, or do we switch to a plan B? Particularly considering that a lot of these students, especially for scholarship programs, might have applied way back in the fall. So making that switch really could be devastating. So we did spend a little extra time waiting to see how things would develop. And in the meantime, the challenge was how to share information about what the program status is while basically everyone in the whole world and the country were in the same boat about not really being sure what would come next. When it was decided that overseas programming wouldn't be feasible, our next challenge was shifting gears and coordinating with our funders and our overseas partners to reimagine our programs in a very short amount of time, to make them meaningful and substantive, and to offer a similar experience to what we try to offer overseas in a virtual format. And that's preparation that usually takes place over a course of a year or more. So to really condense that into just a period of weeks was a real challenge for us. And finally, once we did have virtual offerings to offer students, the next question was, would they be interested? Would they be willing to take the plunge? Online learning really, for study abroad, is not something that we've offered before, so it's a leap into the unknown. How do we reassure applicants that online programming is worthwhile when we don't have many previous examples to share with them? So in terms of our programming and our AC Study Abroad department, we were able to offer all of our programs, but many of them saw students deciding, I would actually prefer to maybe defer my participation until next year, hope things get better. So we did see significant decline in our participant enrollment, which was a real challenge to us. Next slide, please. In administering and offering these online programs for the first time, we confronted quite a few challenges, because we do work with overseas partners that are experienced in teaching these languages, providing this cultural experience, and we find them really valuable key parts of our programs. But it's a challenge because they're all based overseas. The time zone differences, making that work with students in different time zones all across the US as well. Another thing we realized that we were coming across and facing that we don't usually do when all students are overseas is students' other obligations. I mean, if students are enrolled in our online programs, but still at home, they might have many other obligations that they still have, including taking care of family members, work obligations, maybe perhaps other classes that they're enrolled with. And how do we allow students to participate fully in our programs while being cognizant of those challenges as well? Offering programs online and figuring out which platforms work best, their teaching styles, and all of that was a new challenge for us as well, particularly considering certain platforms are not allowed in certain countries. So it was really a case-by-case basis in terms of the tools that we went with. Technical challenges, particularly just stability of Wi-Fi and internet. We had a hurricane come through during the summer that, so you just never really know what's going, you'll need to be flexible to accommodate Zoom fatigue, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, maintaining motivation and managing distractions while at home. So I included a picture a student sent us of her work from home layout, including her cat. So pets can be great company during study, but they get also pets and other family members can be distractions as well. And students cite a lack of connection, not being able to be immersed in the country and the culture, and with their fellow participants, which are having connections to your cohort is a really big aspect of many intensive programs, and having that support. And how do you make up for that? Next slide, please.
Scott, we have a 2-minute warning. Just wanted to jump in and let you know.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I won't touch on all of the strategies we used, but let's see. So the ways that we work through that is by working to provide a flexible schedule, making sure that we're offering lots of face time with our instructors, but supplementing that as well with asynchronous work online. Next slide. Just coming up with creative ways to get students to interact with each other and practice their language skills maybe outside of the classroom, and providing US-based support as well through a virtual resident director who can help with technical support and helping provide guidance on setting goals and staying motivated. These pictures are some of the activities that I've done online with students. Next slide, please. Language partners were a really key element of sort of making up for that lack of connection to the culture and the society. So we had local student peers who were able to walk their phones around and show people things that they would have seen in person. So that's what you're seeing on the right. Another example of a great way that language partners really enriched our students' participation was that students had a movie night where they watched a movie together and commented in the target language. Next slide, please. We had online cultural activities. This photo on the right here, it was just posted yesterday by our colleagues at the Critical Language Fellowship. They had dangdut. It's a genre of Indonesian music. They had performers and dancers giving examples. Next slide, please. All their cultural activities I don't have time for, but we have masks and making food as well. Culture and eating and cooking is a great way to connect. Next slide, please. So just looking ahead, so we expect that our spring 2021 programs will primarily be online, but there's an opportunity that some of them may be able to proceed overseas in certain countries. Summer 2021 and beyond, we're optimistic about the possibility of returning overseas, but we're also know that we just never know what might happen. So our success this year is heartening to see that we're able to offer meaningful and effective overseas experiences for students, whether it's actually overseas or online. So no matter what comes up, we know that we'll be able to offer students meaningful options and opportunities. So which countries are able to proceed overseas, it will be a case-by-case consideration, I believe. But I think there's a permanent role for online study abroad as well in terms of expanding access for students who may not be in a position to go overseas at a certain time. It's a great stepping stone, I think, for maybe later going overseas. And our colleagues in the NISLY program for high schoolers, that's something they actually implemented before COVID. In the fall of 2019, they started virtual programs. So it was, and that's something that's continued, and I think will continue after COVID as well. And something that we're offering right now is a part-time online program for students who are enrolled in classes already. And that's something I think we could offer in the future for students who may not be able to go overseas, but do want access to intensive language study, and especially in certain languages that they don't have access to in their home universities. That is my presentation. Thanks so much for your time. Some links there for you.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's really interesting. I'm particularly thrilled to hear about the different innovations in study abroad from home. And so hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. For now, let us thank Scott and move over to Alexis. So Alexis, you're up. Please share some of your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the NRC and OAS for giving me the space to talk with you guys about my international study experience and what I kind of expect from the COVID-19 impact. I studied abroad at Ewha Women's University in 2017 in their intensive Korean program. I originally chose to go to Ewha because I started studying Korean on my own at community college before transferring to my 4-year, where there was a Korean plan in place, but it was kind of hard to find a domestic Korean program that would prepare me for the level of fluency I feel like I needed to be competitive in the future. And I wanted to put those skills I had worked so hard on to good use. So Korea was kind of a natural choice for me, since I also had started traveling to Korea regularly during the summer months, about once a year. So I really was looking to be challenged. So when it came to my language study and choosing Ewha, I consulted with my program director and my long-term Korean professors who had watched my domestic growth at home, and we kind of decided on Ewha because of the historical significance of Ewha, as well as like the rigor of the program. It was very intensive, basically 5 to 6 hours a day, if I can remember the correct hours, just pure studying, and then being put to immediate use once I left university because it was in Seoul. So there was immediate application, constant use of it. And my program had no English component. So there was a lot of slow learning process to making friends, but over time our Korean got exponentially better, and we were able to communicate much faster just because of the strength of the program alone. So even over time, as my use continued every day and got much better, I had to take a placement test, which had a writing and a speaking section, and I was placed in the immediate section. And as I found out very quickly in my class of maybe 10 or 13 students, that I was the only American present in the room, and I was the only Black American at that university at that time. So it was kind of very a different area for me to be existing in abroad. So in terms of like furthering my goals and pursuing that intensive Korean language study, right now the pandemic has sort of flattened my goals for right now. I had reached a place where I was going to be able to pursue a program in the coming year, well, and this year as well, but that ended up getting pretty snuffed out pretty quickly. So right now I'm kind of uncertain, as mentioned, amongst all of us, that it seems kind of uncertain when and how I will be able to kind of pursue that same sort of intensive study in Korea, if possible, in the future, or, next year from now, who knows when, really. Which is kind of really funny because I ended up traveling in South Korea for the same reasons during the MERS epidemic, much to my mom's dismay. But, I fared pretty well. And, even though this isn't comparable, I don't think this is kind of, I always seem to end up picking the times where there are something extreme going on in South Korea. I was there for Park Geun-hye, I was there for MERS, and, now I'm trying to get there during a pandemic. So I seem to attract extreme situations. I am looking into fellowships for next year. I am hoping to apply and maybe see if I get lucky and am able to still travel, but right now it's kind of just unsure. So I'm looking kind of at how it impacts my own students. As mentioned, I do work for the university full-time. It is how I support my degree and myself. And when it comes to those particular challenges, I see students that I interact face. It reminds me of the challenges that I faced as an international student. You're coming abroad because you're trying to get something that you can't just get at home. There's an additional element that needs to be layered on top for it to really have some meaningful impact, meaningful learning, meaningful use. And so when I was in Korea, most of my challenges were mostly faced by, learning a new language, being, representing multiple identities. I'm the only American in a class of primarily Asian students. I'm the only Black American in a class of, still mostly Asian students. And so I ended up picking up a bunch of different identities to represent myself going abroad. The first time I went to Korea, I was asked if I carried, a particular weapon, and the answer is no. And, having questions about my Black identity is, something that I constantly have to kind of give diplomatic answers to, because you are representing your larger group, yourself, your country, your university, which comes with additional strings. So I cannot tell you all the level of stress that kind of comes with, representing all of those pieces. So really my challenges weren't so much integrating culturally or, adapting. I feel like I did very well at that, but it's mostly kind of making sure I uphold this kind of, I won't say elite, but, academic higher learning standard, representing all of these different items. They have to come off as not stereotypical. So that was kind of stressful for me. So I can kind of see that when students come here to go to school, that they're kind of going through the same, if not the exact same motions that I went through about asking difficult questions and, representing themselves and all of that. So, there's always a lot at stake when students are either going abroad or coming abroad or finding interest in things outside of their country that you need to go get from a different location. So, right, as I mentioned, I work for the university. My students are kind of going through a period of uncertainty, mostly unexpected from what we've seen in anything. We have the visa issues. The pandemic is putting questions on students, holding on to their visa status, as mentioned by Dr. Engel. And, it's working with them through these difficult times where I'm frankly also afraid for them, doing what I can to support them and, making sure that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they can get what they came here for. Because there's something here that they want. Students come to GW because there is something that they want. I went to Korea because Korean is what I wanted to know. I wanted to use it. So I had to go to Korea to truly get the full cultural, linguistic, food, any sort of effect, raw from the source. So I feel like the biggest downside that we're kind of all facing right now is that we're losing out on the multiple points of view that we can get from, being in person in a room together. I understand that we've done very well moving online for all of these programs and things like that, but there's really only so much maybe a screen and a microphone can translate for someone, especially if they're more of a visual, kinetic learner. Being in place with somebody to constantly push you towards doing something greater is, being lost over the connection of internet. So I'm hoping that in the future, we can kind of remember that the one for international education is still very much there. Students from now until the end of time will want to go to where they feel like they will be able to best support their education. We've seen migration forever going on. It's going to happen for the rest of us. But I feel like right now we all understand that as much as we would want to go, the risk is too high across the board and the payoff is, questionable. Do you expose others, at what rate, and things like that, and cost as well is also something that we all kind of have to assess. So I do hope that we can all realize how important having an international education component is in our education. We are living in a globalized world where it is required of us to understand different cultures, languages, points of view, to kind of reach a holistic answer to some of our world's problems. And once you travel abroad, as an international student or, in any capacity, you learn that where you were was not the center. You're learning that other centers exist and, the other centers have connections to other centers. So I feel like that, even if, the field doesn't matter, if it's business, if it's Asian studies, Latin American studies, there has to be an international component so you can understand how to angle yourself in a world that's constantly changing. So that's pretty much my piece. EWA was wonderful. I hope that I find my way back to Korea for Korean studies. It's something that really interests me, but I hope we can all get back out there next year and enjoy those programs that are most valuable to us in our career and academic growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. You touched on so many interesting themes, particularly some of your end messaging about the values of global travel and its connections to learning about ourselves and all of those identities that you touched on and our places in the world. So hopefully we can pick up on some of that as well in the Q&A. I also wrote down your line, the want for international education goes on. And that to me is a powerful statement. For now, let's go over to Luz, our final speaker on the panel. Again, if you have questions, please don't forget to put them in the chat as we go. So Luz, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Laura, and thanks to NRC and OES to invite me to this panel. I was born and raised in China. I did my undergraduate study in China, in Beijing, on journalism. And after graduation, I worked as an international news reporter for Caixin and also in Beijing as a researcher, mostly covering diplomacy. So as an international news reporter, I wanted to learn more about the global affairs that I was covering. So I decided to study international affairs. And once I decided what to study, became a very obvious choice for me. So I came to George Washington University Elias School of International Affairs for a master's program and then graduated this May. International and Technology Policy. So to me, the first interruption of COVID-19 pandemic was, of course, I feel GW did a decent job transitioning us from in-person classes to virtual classes, but then that's only for applies to like probably my class because we started the spring semester online, and then when we transitioned to virtual classes, that was easier. But then I can't imagine those students who are starting a full courses online, or for some of them, maybe they're starting their degree program online virtually from another country. So I can imagine that's much difficult. So in the context of COVID-19 pandemic and also its effect on international educations, I want to talk about 3 challenges from the perspective of an international student studying here in the US. So the first is the healthcare concerns, and the second is the job prospects here in the US for international students, and also, of course, the anti-Asian racism and also violence. So for the first one, the health threats, if we can recall what was happening in January, February, and March, I know that feels like a century ago, but when the US started to confirm cases and up until the nationwide shutdown, not many people were taking precautions, social distancing, not many were wearing masks. At the same time, there was also very limited testing capabilities here in the US. So for the international students community, they tend to read more international news, and they saw what was happening in China, South Korea, Italy, those countries who were hit hard by the pandemic and then who were struggling. And then they look back here in the US, they're concerned, and their parents, their family back in their home country are absolutely panicking. So that was when many of them decided to leave the US for healthcare concerns. And some also like the confidence of the healthcare system here. I remember I had a friend who from Thailand, and she flew back in early March. She told me that while you can see what's happening in Europe, in China, in South Korea,
We might have lost you, Luz.
I could feel that. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's try.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, we can hear you
Okay.
now.
Yeah, so of course, the healthcare concern. So earlier this year, a lot of international students decided to go back to the home country, take classes, the spring courses online. And then when they were considering of coming back to continue their degree this fall semester, they saw what was happening during the summer in the US in terms of the pandemic control, and it was not well controlled. So many of them decided to stay and then to continue the courses online for the fall semester and to come back for the next spring semester. But then again, the cases are surging, there is a third wave, so still a lot of uncertainties. Career development prospects in the US for international students. So many foreign students studying here in the US, especially those who are in master's degrees, PhD degrees, they have a goal of finding a job after graduation, because especially for STEM students, the best companies and the best jobs, most of them are here in the US. So, and also a lot of foreign students grew up learning that the US is a country built by immigrants, thriving on immigrants' contributions, and also traditionally has a friendly immigration system for newcomers, especially for those who received higher education here in the US. So, but this reputation and also the system have greatly changed during the Trump administration, and has gotten much worse during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, as a member of the class of 2020, we definitely graduated in the best job market in history, the most devastating job market. And for me personally, my summer internship was canceled, and most of the private sectors are on hire freeze. Many of them are still on hire freeze, so they're not hiring. And then, in the meantime, the White House are saying that the jobs will all be saved for Americans, and you see all the visa restrictions, not only for students, but also for foreign workers, for OPT, for H-1B, all those work visas. So that also gives a signal to the international students and raise the concern of whether they will be treated fairly in the job market, or as fairly as before, because there has always been this visa restrictions, a certain degree of visa restrictions. So this led to another wave of international students who they feel like they can't find a job. And this also probably will discourage some students who are considering to come to study in the US, but then decided to not, because one of the great advantage of studying here in the US is the career development prospects, and that has been greatly in particular talk about the COVID-19 has affected international students from Asia. As we can see from the news, anti-Asian racism since the COVID-19 pandemic hit the US, and also maybe globally, but particularly here for the US, who are hosting. We see incidents like in March we read a news that a South Korean female international student was punched in the face on the street in New York just because she was Asian. And then for me, around me, my friends, Asian Americans, many international students, and also even some of our teachers, they start to encounter racist incidents, and they were called racial slurs, and they were called coronavirus, they were called to go back to China, although the majority of them are not from China. And then I personally, I came to study came to the US in 2016, and I always lived in Washington, D.C., and I didn't hear any of my close friends report racism incidents until this year. And then me personally, I wasn't called a racial slur until this year. So as international students, we sort of have this degree of racism in the US, but then the recent developments this year has really surprised many of them or scared some of them, because those incidents start to happen to themselves. They start to get caught named. They start to be attacked or aggressed. So this also is one of the reasons that many Asian students decided to travel back and avoid this high peak of COVID pandemic, and this also discouraged some Asian students from coming here to the U.S. Include 3 challenges: healthcare concerns, career development prospects, and racism against Asian students. And with the new Biden administration, many friends, also people around me, expect things will improve on these 3 fronts. But there's still a lot of uncertainties, and the moderator, what do you think will change after Joe Biden coming to the White House? Yeah, I think that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luz. This was a fantastic set of remarks and these challenges, as well as a fantastic segue to a question that I have for each of you to reflect upon and offer your perspectives on. And my question for you is here. How can the U.S. government and higher education institutions respond to these issues in the near future? So in these challenges that you have articulated, how can not only the U.S. government, new administration, but also higher ed institutions, how can we address some of these challenges? Scott, can I turn to you first and then open up to either Alexis or Luz to comment on?
Sure. I think in terms of study abroad providers, it's just working to make sure that we're learning from what our experience has been and being flexible. I think it's just difficult to know sort of how the rest of this pandemic will go. And certain countries might be able to proceed with overseas experiences before others, and just making sure that everyone, we continue to provide, so learn from our experiences and provide opportunities for everyone, whether it's overseas or online.
Alexis or Luz, any thoughts on what the government or higher education institutions can do?
I think that both have to honestly work together to get visa restrictions much easier on the international student. I feel like it is very hard to maintain one. There was a lot of back and forth I saw from the administrative side working for the university that students who were international students still had to find an online class to on campus class to maintain that status. And that, there was discourse around that. Well, why would we deliberately expose them in, a country that is not theirs? They're trying to receive an education in a safe, peaceful manner. So, that sort of whole thing, the restrictions just have to be easier. I'm not talking about lax. Of course, there's still responsibility, but the level to maintain, I guess, needs to be reassessed across the board and then applied.
I think right now the most pandemic under control, especially here in the US. I feel like a lot of students and also their parents who are concerned about and so with the government's effort of doing a better job in terms of important.
Excellent. Thank you for your views. One other question I'd like to pose to the panel is, assuming we're returning to normalcy, and again, hopefully we can, that will be coming soon, and we could sustain or maintain any of these innovative examples of international education at home or study abroad at home, such as, for example, the language partners that Scott shared some information about. What would each of you like to see us keep? And kind of in that vein, what simply can't be replicated by studying abroad while at home? So again, Scott, can I turn it to you to kick things off, and we'll just do a final round?
Sure. I think that this effort to provide online study abroad as a way to expand access was something that was actually started through NISLY before the coronavirus, but because all of study abroad has been in that format since then, I think there's so much we've learned about how to do it better. And I think that's definitely something we can move forward, continue to provide these virtual programs as a form of access to international education that we hope provides a stepping stone to studying abroad eventually later down their academic careers. So I do hope that can continue not only at the high school level, but hopefully maybe at the college level as well. There's plenty of, I think, college students who would benefit from similar experiences. Oh man, the second part of your question is a challenge. I think, of course, food, I think, is difficult to replicate for a lot of people. But we do try with like cooking, cultural classes to provide certain things, but not everyone has access to all the ingredients and all that. But that's just one element that comes to mind.
Alexis, any of your views that you'd like to add?
I really love the presentation from Scott that illuminated that there are some online international programs, which is something I didn't really consider because usually when you think international education, you have to go wherever the international is. So I would love to see that continue. I would love to see those connections continue to be made. Is the best part of going abroad, at least 50%. But I do agree that I would like to see that continue. And then just kind of giving more space to students who still want an international global education, but not able to necessarily spend the large money, to go here. About education to those who are maybe bound to stay at their current location. So I think that's interesting.
And Luz, any views from you on these questions?
Yeah, I agree with both other two panelists that I feel like the online international study programs, it would be great to expand that, especially for those who probably do not have the financial and also other resources to actually spend a fortune to go to other countries to study. And if those kind of programs can be made more affordable, and that would be great too.
Excellent. So unfortunately, even though it feels as though we just got our discussion started, we have reached time. I want to take a moment and thank each of our panelists, Scott, Alexis, and Luz. Thank you for your wonderful insights and sharing your perspectives and experiences with us. To our organizers, Jisoo, Richard, Amir, and Dwayne, thank you for all of your efforts in pulling together this wonderful event this afternoon. Thank you to all of our audience members for attending. There is a survey that's part of this event. If you could please scan this code or use the URL below and take just a few minutes to fill out the survey. I want to end actually with a line that Alexis offered to us. The want for international education goes on. And I think that is full of hope and inspiration despite all of the changes and challenges that we're facing. I have appreciated very much to be a part of this event and look forward to staying in touch with all of you. So stay well and take care. Bye.